Okay, so for this deep dive, we're going to unpack a piece of history that, well, for a long time was intentionally left packed away.
Right.
We're moving beyond the usual narrative of the Viking Age, the one that's all about the conquerors.
Hmm.
Instead, we're excavating the reality of the conquered, specifically the fate of Christian nuns taken from monasteries like Lindisfarne.
And that's a crucial distinction because for generations, the church actively buried this account. They much preferred the other story,
The simpler
the
ones.
simpler, cleaner one, the glorious martyrdom narrative, a quick death that upholds the idea of divine protection.
But that's not what happened here.
Not at all. What we're examining today, mostly through the harrowing personal account of Sister Katrine,
Right.
is the complicated, agonizing truth of the survival.
Survival and everything you believe in, your faith, your vows, the very walls around you is
Yeah.
just gone, rendered meaningless in an instant.
Exactly.
And the sources we have, they give us this just unflinching look. They anchor the entire experience in a really devastating psychological trauma.
Yeah, and it starts in such a specific place. Katrine's deepest wound, the thing she comes back to over and over, isn't the physical pain. It's not even seeing her sisters broken.
It's a sound, or the lack of one.
It's the lack of one. It's the absolute total blankness in her memory of her own reaction when the attack started.
Did she scream out to God? Did she stay silent?
And she doesn't know. The fact that she cannot retrieve that sound, that she doesn't know her own voice in that foundational moment of terror, that becomes the core of the damage.
It's the ultimate evidence of shock, isn't it? Of dissociation.
Textbook. The
Yeah.
brain just cannot process the level of violence being inflicted, so it checks out. That blankness is a form of self-preservation, but, one that leaves a permanent, terrifying hole in who you are.
We meet her in the immediate aftermath, and every detail just screams of this new reality. She's huddled in a stolen wool blanket.
And it smells wrong. Not of linen and incense, but of sweat, fish oil, and smoke. Nothing is consecrated or clean anymore.
And she's watching the Viking camp. It's pre-dawn, dark, and she hears their language.
Which she describes as rocks grinding together.
Yeah, this harsh, abrasive noise. It's completely devoid of any human melody to her.
And then there's this observation she makes that is so revealing and maybe even calculated on their part. The way the men behave toward the captured women.
The act of not looking.
Yes. The deliberate act of not looking. They don't meet their eyes. They treat them like objects, like cargo or livestock whose fate has already been decided.
That indifference, that can be so much more crippling than just outright malice.
It is. Malice at least acknowledges you as a person, as an adversary. Indifference just treats you as a tool, an object.
So was that a tactic? Was that a conscious bit of psychological warfare, or just, how they saw them from the second they were captured?
I think, based on how systematic everything was, it had to be a tactic, a method of desensitization for everyone involved. If they acknowledge them as consecrated nuns, the moral weight of what they're doing, it increases.
But if they're just things?
If they're just things, it streamlines the whole process of transport and exploitation.
The mission here, then, is to move beyond that simple historical footnote, beyond the easy label of martyrs.
Right.
This is a way for you to understand the Viking Age not just as raiding, but as a kind of economic engine, one powered by control, human theft, and propaganda.
And we're seeing it through the eyes of those whose stories were erased. Erased because their painful survival was, frankly, a theological crisis for the church. It complicated the whole narrative.
Okay, so to really understand the depth of that shattering, we have to appreciate what was broken. Let's go back 3 days before the raid. Let's look at the rhythms of the Lindisfarne convent.
It was a life of supreme discipline, of structure, all governed by the rule of St. Benedict.
And that rule wasn't just a guide, it was a fortress against chaos, right?
Absolutely. It prescribed every single moment of every day. It gave them their identity, their purpose. And Katrine, who's 31 at this point, she's a seasoned copist.
Not just writing, she's
Yeah.
producing high-value assets.
Exactly. She's deep into this huge project, a prayer book for a bishop in Durham. This is a massive political and religious undertaking, months of specialized painstaking labor.
And the physical evidence of that life is so telling. The sources mention her hands being permanently stained with, what was it, iron ghoul ink.
Iron gall ink, yeah. That was the standard ink of the medieval era. It's made from iron salts and tannic acids, usually from oak galls.
So it's organic, but permanent.
Oh, incredibly permanent. When it first hits the parchment, it looks grayish, but as it oxidizes, it turns this deep, deep black. and it's chemically aggressive. It literally burns into the parchment.
Which is why it stained her skin.
Exactly. She's constantly dipping, blotting, dealing with spills. That stain was a badge of honor, a physical sign of her sacred intellectual work.
Right under the calluses from holding the quill for hours and hours in a cold scriptorium.
And the low-grade back pain that was just a constant, familiar part of her devotional offering. This physical dedication, this meticulous labor, that's what defined her value, her entire existence.
And there was a hierarchy to this work, wasn't there?
A definite hierarchy. Katrine had the steady hand for a major commission. But then you have someone like Sister Moira, who's younger, maybe 26. Her hands aren't as steady.
So she gets the less prestigious work.
The less prestigious work. Scraping mistakes off the parchment with a knife. And you have to remember, parchment was made from treated animal skin. It was incredibly expensive. You couldn't just cross things out.
So the precision of your script literally determined your standing.
In the eyes of the abbess.
And
maybe in the eyes of God.
the pace of that life was just punishing, but it was sanctified. You've got matins at midnight, a couple hours of sleep, then prime and work until dawn.
It's a system designed to keep the mind and body focused purely on the spiritual. Abbess Elred, she taught them that the very act of copying scripture was a form of communion.
A physical connection to the divine text.
It was their entire universe, a rigid, predictable structure. And its integrity was supposed to be their protection.
Which is why the sudden appearance of the messenger was such a seismic shock. The rhythm just slams into brutal reality.
It's a violent intrusion. A boy, he's barely 14, his horse is foaming at the mouth, and he's screaming for Father Cuthbert, the abbot.
He delivers the news, and he's gone.
Instantly. The speed of it signals this is not a negotiation, this is an emergency.
And the news is ships, not traders, raiders.
And this wasn't a complete surprise in the abstract. These kinds of attacks were becoming more frequent along the Northumbrian coast. But it's different when it's your shore.
So Abbess Elred, who's 62, this commanding presence, she reacts.
She reacts with strategy, not prayer. That's what's so telling. She gathers all 73 sisters and gives them 3 hours. 3 hours to prepare.
And her instructions reveal she knows exactly what the raiders are after, material wealth.
Move the manuscripts to the eastern keep. Bury the chalices, the vestments, the portable gold and silver deep in the garden.
And then the most chilling instruction.
Dress plainly. Hide nothing of value on your persons.
The goal is to present an impression of complete nothingness. If there's no treasure, maybe they move on.
But there was that profound, unspoken question hanging in the air, the fear that no one dared to voice.
What if the Vikings decide that we are the treasure?
Exactly. They could hide the silver, they could hide the gold thread, they couldn't hide their bodies.
And in that moment, Katrine has this devastating reflection. She was given to the convent at 7 years old. It gave her a purpose, a skill, a life.
A life outside the capricious will of men.
And now, as she's helping to erase all evidence of that sacred existence, she realizes it all feels like a dream, like a fantasy someone else lived. The certainty of decades just dissolves.
That moment of dissolution, that's the prelude to the total shattering that follows. The shattering came at dawn.
A gray, featureless sky, and then the sound.
The sound of oars, rhythmic, purposeful, cutting the water, the sound of longships built for speed, built for conquest.
And the alarm bell, a young monk, Cuthbert, ringing it frantically. It sounds high-pitched, almost like a scream.
A last, futile attempt to call down God's protection.
But the attack was too coordinated. And that coordination, it speaks to the motive, which our sources confirm wasn't just about gold.
That's such a vital piece of context. Yes, Lingzan was wealthy, but for a jarl from the Oslo region of Norway, the voyage itself was a huge investment, a huge risk.
They needed more than just portable treasure.
They needed human capital. They came for people. Monks and nuns were valuable for labor, for ransom, for control. It was business.
So this assault, 70 to 80 men, it's systematic. They don't just burn everything.
No, fire destroys value. They wanted to take everything usable, and they went for the scriptorium first.
Think of that. They weren't just grabbing gold chalices. They were taking centuries of knowledge, illuminated texts, histories.
The intellectual treasury of Northumbria, gathered like any other loot and just thrown into rough woven baskets.
Then they break into the convent, the chapel doors splinter, the physical sanctuary is gone.
And inside, Abbess Elred provides this moment of profound, quiet defiance.
She just stays kneeling.
Stays kneeling before the altar, hands clasped, eyes on the crucifix. It's not aggressive, but it's an act of non-cooperation. It forces the Viking captain to confront an authority he just doesn't recognize.
The captain, Ragnar, a jarl from Oslo, he walks in. The sources describe him with a scar splitting his face.
And a smile. Not a kind smile. A smile of clinical amusement.
He just gives the order in Norse, get them up, get them organized.
And the selection process that follows is just brutally calculated.
The monks, the old, the infirm, the ones who fought back, they were killed. Father Cuthbert, beaten with the flat of an axe and left on the sand, worthless to them.
But the nuns, they were kept alive. They had utility.
Katrine catalogs the journey to the ships. 12 minutes. 21 nuns, hands bound with cords that cut deep.
And you see the immediate psychological retreat. Sister Moira is chanting the Lord's Prayer in Latin, trying to hide inside her faith where they can't touch her.
Meanwhile, Ragnar is walking alongside them, assessing his new property. Katrine notes his pale, colorless eyes, always assessing.
She notes his interest in her, specifically because she refuses to meet his gaze. She's trying to be invisible, but that defiance, that small act, it seems to pique his curiosity.
And then, on the beach, he stops them and delivers this cruel ultimatum.
And it's translated by a man named Godwin, a Northumbrian trader who had gone Viking.
What does that even mean, to go Viking?
It was often just pure economic pragmatism. He probably traded with the Norse, learned the language, and realized that aligning with this new power was more profitable than staying loyal to a struggling kingdom.
He adopted their lifestyle, if not their religion.
Exactly. And his steady voice, translating Ragnar's terms in their own tongue, just made the cruelty that much worse.
Well, the choice Ragnar offers, it's pure theater.
Complete theater. Choice A, beg for a quick death now. A sharp axe, a brief mercy. Choice B, live, sail north, work, survive, become something new.
Godwin even adds that chilling line, some of you might even be happy.
And Ragnar's smile just confirms it's all meaningless. The purpose wasn't to offer a choice. It was to destroy their hope immediately, to force them to choose self-abasement.
The standoff breaks when the oldest sister, Beatrice, collapses. The Vikings just stand there, waiting.
A man readies his axe, a silent test. And it's ended not by the weapon, but by Avis Elrid.
This is the moment, the pivot.
She chooses absolute, immediate compliance. We'll come, all of us. We won't resist. Her voice has this terrible certainty. She chose survival for the group over a glorious but final martyrdom.
And Ragnar sees that. He recognizes her authority.
And he immediately weaponizes it.
Yeah.
His condition is precise. She will be kept alive only if she is useful, and her use is to keep the others compliant, to become an overseer for her own sisters.
She has to break herself, become complicit, to save their lives.
And that terrible choice is exactly why the church found this story so inconvenient. A martyr's purity is simple. A survivor's choice is complicated and painful.
So if their life was shattered on the shore, the voyage north was the process of total suffocation. They're chained below deck. 22 women crammed into a cargo hold.
No light, no fresh air. The air is thick, wet, still. And the smell defined their suffering.
Rotting fish, unwashed men.
And something else, an ancient organic odor that suggested this wasn't the first time the ship had carried human cargo. That suffering had soaked into the wood.
Ragnar makes a strategic choice here. He keeps Elrid chained with the others.
Right, and Katrine analyzes this later. It was deliberate. A leader among prisoners maintains order better than a captor can.
He outsourced the management of despair.
He forced her to make the impossible choices, which made her complicit in their breaking. He didn't have to waste his time or his men's energy. He just used her authority against them.
The first deaths on that journey are described as almost the sea's mercy. Sister Beatrice, the one who collapsed on the beach.
She died the first night. Her heart just stopped, and her body was left there, chained for 3 days. The Vikings wouldn't waste the effort to move her.
That presence, the smell of an ending.
It was a profound psychological weapon.
Yeah.
2 more followed. Sister Marjorie, who just seemed to fade away, and Sister Corinne, who stopped eating, chose her own end. They were down to 17.
But the real systemic cruelty wasn't the hunger or the cold. It was the men's visits.
Frequent, agonizing, mostly at night, drunk on mead. Sometimes they were taken topside, but as the voyage wore on, the assaults happened right there in the hold under that single dim oil lamp.
And the other nuns, they just tried to be deaf and blind.
A shared complicit trauma, pretending that not looking meant it wasn't happening.
And Katrine develops her own defense mechanism, invisibility.
She realized any sign of strength or defiance was dangerous, so she worked to erase herself, curled into the darkest corner, matted her hair, stopped speaking, stopped responding to her name. She tried to become a shadow.
And the detail in the source is just chilling. She says this strategy worked for the most part.
That, for the most part, is a massive unspoken indictment of what still happened. It speaks to the ultimate randomness of their suffering.
And her greatest fear must have been watching what happened to Abbess Elred.
About 2 weeks in, a drunken man came below deck and pointed. Not at a younger woman. He pointed at the abbess.
And she didn't struggle.
She stood and walked topside with him, as if she had been waiting for that final, complete degradation, the destruction of her spiritual authority in the most physical way possible.
She came back an hour later, and she was changed.
Profoundly. Katrine observed her face was a different shape, her eyes somewhere else. The assault didn't just break her body, it broke her ability to locate herself in that reality. She was silent for 2 days.
And when she finally spoke, it wasn't comfort or prayer.
It was a command, a new, terrible philosophy for survival. She told them, your souls don't live in your bodies.
It's a total theological break. The body as a temple, that's gone.
It's gone. She's redefining holiness. What they take, what they do, it doesn't touch that. It was a desperate attempt to build a psychological shield.
But Sister Moira asks the crucial question, how do you protect something like that?
And Elred's reply is the most honest, painful thing a spiritual leader could say. I haven't figured that out yet. She had just realized the rules of survival had not yet been written. She was learning them, moment by moment, in the dark.
If the voyage was a prelude, the destination felt like the end of the world. A fjord in what's now Norway. A cut in the mountains that rose like walls built by giants.
Complete isolation, absolute cold. Katrine says she wondered if this was a Christian hell.
And this is where the historical record just goes silent. The Anglo-Saxon chronicles mention the raid in 793, monks killed, treasures stolen.
But the 73 women, they become a footnote, assumed dead, martyred, because the reality of their survival was just too complicated for the narrative.
So 20 women disembark, thin, gray-skinned, and they have a devastating realization.
They're not prisoners of war waiting for ransom. They are thralls, slaves, property.
Ragnar's settlement is pragmatic, built for survival, and the women are put to use immediately.
Cooking, cleaning, mending, tending animals, and the critical job of preparing fish for the winter. They were given just enough food and shelter to remain useful.
And Ragnar gives them their new mandate.
You'll work, you'll obey, you'll forget the God who didn't protect you. Learn our language, forget yours. Be useful or perish.
But the labor was secondary, wasn't it? There was a deeper purpose.
The primary motive was possession as a statement. Taking these consecrated Christian women, believed to be sacred and untouchable, and breaking them.
It was an act of profound sacrilege. It was propaganda delivered by force.
A message sent directly to Christendom. Your protection means nothing. Your God is weak. I can take what you treasure most.
A grim system of use quickly developed based on a kind of cruel economic logic.
Right. The strongest women, the ones most essential for heavy labor, were often spared most of the assaults. Their utility needed to be preserved. They were too valuable to damage.
But the younger, more delicate ones,
They were taken regularly. By Ragnar, his men, visiting traders. Their short-term use was prioritized over their long-term value as workers.
the psychological collapse was rapid. Sister Moira, who tried to hide in prayer on the ship.
She broke within the first week, stopped speaking, eating, started hallucinating. One morning, she just walked into the fjord and didn't come back. Her name was forgotten. It was easier for the survivors to just move on.
And then there's the incredible adaptation of the other Sister Beatrice, the one who learned to go somewhere else entirely.
It's a textbook definition of profound, sustained dissociation, a mental escape.
She trained herself to detach, to be physically present but mentally absent during the assaults.
Using her mind to achieve a separation her faith could no longer provide. The source says she would return to her body afterwards, stepping back into it with the careful precision of someone stepping back into clothes that no longer fit.
That imagery is devastating. The body is still there, but the self is an ill-fitting, desecrated garment.
They were learning, violently, that survival meant splitting the soul from the flesh. As the winter deepened, Katrine, the skilled copist, found her own path to survival.
And it was terrifyingly effective.
She made herself indispensable, Ragnar's favorite, not through affection, but through pure, cold utility.
She used the same meticulous skill from the scriptorium, but for domestic service. Cleaning his space, mending his clothes.
And most importantly, learning to read his moods. anticipating his needs. She was constantly rewriting her identity from sacred worker to indispensable low-maintenance slave.
And the payoff for this bargain was?
Agonizing. She was left alone most of the time. The source says this usefulness was almost a mercy, but then adds the qualifier. The almost is where all the damage lives.
The bargain required accepting constant degradation, but it gave her the best chance of physical survival.
Meanwhile, the weight of leadership just completely crushed Abbess Elred. She aged a decade and 2 months, making impossible choices about food, knowing which sisters were being taken to the slavers' market and being powerless to stop it.
By the time the deepest winter arrived, the conditions were brutal. Extreme cold, devastating snow.
And 3 more women killed, Catherine. Margaret froze to death in their sleep. Their bodies buried in the frozen foreign ground, far from any sacred resting place, destined to be forgotten.
Which brings us to the core trauma. The event no church historian could ever record because it was too inconvenient, too messy for the Christian narrative.
Pregnancy.
The fact is staggering. 7 of the nuns became pregnant.
Carrying the physical evidence of what had been done to them, their consecrated bodies were now broadcasting the ownership of their captors. It was the ultimate humiliation, the ultimate statement of Norse power over Christian doctrine.
And it didn't stop the work. It didn't stop the assaults. They were thralls, and their bodies remained property regardless.
Katrine realized she was among them, deep in that winter, pregnant with a child of rape, confirming the violence had succeeded in creating something that should not exist. And this prompted her deepest crisis.
She goes to the edge of the frozen fjord. She's contemplating suicide, an easy, quick peace.
But Elred appears. Broken, but still their leader.
And she doesn't use theology or prayer. She just says one word: don't.
Katrine challenges her. What's the point? We're already dead.
And Elred's final act of defiance isn't against God. It's against their captors. He says, they want you dead, and I won't give them that satisfaction. I won't let them have that victory.
The only defiance left was just to continue living, a refusal to grant them the final victory of destroying their spirits.
2 weeks later, Katrine lost the child, in silence and darkness, an ending that the source describes as a mercy.
These events, hidden, unspoken, happening in the gaps between survival, never to be recorded in the annals of history.
So we've spent this time excavating this deeply uncomfortable history, but what's the key takeaway? What is the knowledge we are actually gaining here?
I think the key knowledge is about how powerful institutions, in this case the medieval church, control historical narratives, how they sanitize them.
The church desperately needed Lindisfarne to be a story of clean, simple martyrdom.
Exactly. They eliminated stories like Katrine's because complicated, painful survival.
Yeah.
It fundamentally challenges the idea of divine protection. It challenges the whole concept of purity.
The women's survival actually becomes an attack on the doctrine. If God allowed this level of violation and suffering, then the whole structure of the church's promise to the faithful is questioned.
It was so much easier to just assume they died singing psalms than to face the reality of Elred's choices or Katrine's cold bargain of utility.
We've tried here to remember the names, the sounds, the scents, the precise contours of the trauma.
Moving beyond the historical footnote to the deeply human reality.
So if we accept that history is constantly shaped by those in power to serve a cleaner, more comfortable narrative, to create martyrs instead of survivors, that raises an important question for you, the listener.
What other acts of silent, painful survival, by those deemed inconvenient or unimportant or just disruptive to the story we want to tell ourselves, are we still refusing to see?
Or are being actively erased in the modern world? The refusal to look away. That's where true, meaningful history really begins.